Hi, welcome back to Title Talk with Title Leap, where we are all about empowering agents with the tools they need to succeed. Today we're going to talk about special assessments and how they are treated differently under the contract and the addendums. Hi, I'm James Brown, founder of Title Leap and attorney at James Brown Law.
And I'm David Velez, Chief Development Officer and Closer Extraordinaire at James Brown Law.
Closer Extraordinaire, I had to slip that in.
Yes, I did.
All right, today we're talking about special addendums and their differentiating treatment between the contract and the homeowner association and the condominium association riders.
Okay, so what is a special assessment exactly, Jim?
In the contract, it is a special assessment imposed by a public body.
Okay.
So we're talking about water improvement features of that local community. We're talking about street improvement features of that local community, and it's not imposed by a condominium or homeowner association. And that says it in the contract, the 2017 FAR. Unfortunately, we're still seeing some confusion among realtors. They're thinking it applies to those private associations. It's not. It's strictly public it's public utilities.
Okay.
And so Delray has these things frequently.
Miami.
Yep, Miami has these
Port St. Lucie
assessments
has
frequently. Yep.
And so essentially, if you make the wrong election, your seller can all of a sudden be forced to pay the full amount of the assessment, which could be several $1,000s.
Yeah, we just saw one in Delray for $27,000 that the seller had to pay prior to closing.
Wow.
And the election you're talking about is A or B of paragraph F of the 2017 FAR. A is the neutral provision.
Okay.
Seller pays everything up to the day of closing. Buyer pays everything after the day of closing. I think we'd all agree that's fair and reasonable. B is the election that many clever buyer's agents make, and that puts the burden on the seller to pay everything prior to the day of closing.
It looks like if someone wasn't aware of that, it could torpedo a deal pretty quickly.
Yeah, and actually in this Delray deal, the buyer elected B, but I do not believe the buyer was happy after the transaction was getting to close because the seller was so upset they didn't want to close. It was a mess all around.
Right.
So the buyer had this burden now, and the seller was upset they didn't want to close, and there was an ongoing assessment. But the reality is, A is the fair election. If everybody pays their share as they go along, it wasn't much of a burden of the seller, and it wasn't much of a burden of the buyer. It's just when you have to pay the whole thing off in one lump. It actually was only like $1,000 a year or $500 a year.
And so now condominiums and homeowner associations can have a similar type special assessment levied against them. However, there is differences on how they are disclosed on their respective riders. You want to explain that there, Jim?
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks, David. So in the homeowners association rider, there's going to be special assessments that have to be reported, and there can be actually anything levied for special assessment up to the day of the effective date, which is when everybody signs, or up to the date of the closing date. You can elect whether the seller pays it all or they prorate it. Pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, sometimes sellers don't know about this stuff, but you can elect who's going to pay for it. Again, the fair election would be buyer pays their share after closing, seller pays their share up to closing.
Okay.
And I bet you want me to explain this one too.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right, so condominium associations. The condominium association rider has one additional burden. Sellers have to know what's in the agenda and reported in the minutes 12 months prior to closing.
So they have to know if a special assessment exists 12 months before closing. They have to be aware of it, in other words. And if they are aware of it, they have to report it.
Or they could be responsible
even
for it.
though the assessment may not necessarily be quote-unquote effective yet, but it does exist. It's been voted on.
It's been voted on, and it appears in the agenda. If it appears in the agenda, or it appears in the minutes. And so the trick here is that the seller is deemed to have had that knowledge, even if they don't actually have that knowledge, because the contract says that they have that knowledge if it appears there. So the sellers actually have to go back and review the agenda and the minutes 12 months prior if you have any questions, to make sure you're not going to be owing those things on the day of closing.
So yeah, the HOA one seems so much more straightforward. It's like if it exists as of the date to sign the contract or between the contract signing and closing date, there it is.
Right.
Wow.
So the main takeaway here is special assessments. If you have any questions, give us a call. We can work through it.
Thanks for watching Title Talk with Title Leap, where we are all about empowering agents with the tools to succeed.
And hit subscribe, and you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and stay up on all our weekly content.
Thanks for watching.
See you next week.